Well, joining us now for more in-depth analysis on Trump's tariffs is Jonathan Ernest, an assistant economics professor from Case Western Reserve University. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Oh, this is so stressful for so many Americans watching the markets respond. How should the average person expect the tariffs to impact them?
Yeah, so we've seen really wide-ranging tariffs that we haven't seen in maybe 100 years be imposed, and that means it's going to affect all sorts of different goods and services, things that whether they're kind of U.S. products that are using inputs from abroad or whether they're things that you were formerly buying from abroad. We can expect that some of those tariffs may cause increased prices for lots of the things that you typically buy, right as we're kind of coming down from this hill of higher inflation that we've been battling against the last few years.
Professor, of course, as prices of goods continue to rise, there should be maybe consumer fear of spending, right? So is recession a likely outcome for both the U.S. as well as the world?
So it's always a little tricky to predict, whether or not we'll go into either a U.S. or world recession in the future. But I think the odds have increased a bit because we are likely to see, with a lot of this uncertainty, a lot of fall in consumer sentiment, that people may not be able to stretch their budgets and buy quite as much as they used to. And as they're holding back some of those dollars, that means businesses might start to respond by hiring fewer workers because they don't need to produce as many things if they don't expect to sell as much. And that's how we may spiral toward that sort of situation. And that's the sort of thing that we'd like to try to avoid. Because it really creates a lot of issues outside of just usual kind of business cycles.
Yeah, and that R word is scary. Okay, so the news this morning is that China is retaliating with 34% tariffs. Do you believe more countries will send retaliatory tariffs, or do you think that President Trump will be open to negotiations?
So it seems to be still a little bit up in the air in terms of whether or not the Trump administration has telegraphed many times that these are permanent tariffs that are the new way of trying to run the economy and fund U.S. purchases. But at the same time, they've said, well, maybe we're actually implementing these and have some ability to negotiate and reduce them on countries that are willing to reduce their own tariffs. And so that's kept it a little bit uncertain. The Trump administration certainly needs the tariffs to feel like a credible threat that we might leave in place if they are really trying to use them as a negotiating tool. At this point, as of the results of the last couple of days, it seems much more likely that they are a real thing that could stay in place. But at the same time, we've heard this sort of mixed messaging. So it's really uncertain at this point.
And Professor, we saw President Trump list the countries that these tariffs will be imposed on. Can you explain why Russia and North Korea were exempted from this list of tariffs?
Yeah, so I don't know that I can explain specifically why any given countries were exempted, but in terms of which countries the tariffs are put on and to what amounts, while the administration argued that they're sort of reciprocal tariffs and just taxing them at the rate that they're taxing the U.S., it appears that they align much more with just closing trade deficits with countries where we have a large trade deficit and then sort of putting a minimum 10% on pretty much everyone else. So that appears to be some of the reasoning behind how much the tariff is on any given country is targeted much more towards that and a little bit less towards actual reciprocal tariffs, which are what we're seeing other countries put in place in response to the U.S. tariffs.
All right. And of course, all yesterday we were watching the Dow and the markets drop. We see the same thing we're going to be watching today. And in fact, this turned out to be one of the biggest drops we've seen really since COVID. Was that something you expected? And do you expect that to change anytime soon?
Yeah, so the markets really react based on new information that comes in. It would seem based on these drops that people were holding out for maybe less of an impact, either smaller tariffs or pushing them off once again, as we've seen the last couple months. And so it seems to have surprised a lot of people, the vastness of this new tariff plan, which we're really seeing play out in the markets as people are concerned that companies won't be as profitable as we would have otherwise predicted.
Right. All right. Well, we are still watching the Dow. They're more than 1,000 points down this morning. Jonathan Ernest, thank you so much for joining us with your insight.
Thank you.